Alrighty, so this is a podcast about the movie for the sci-fi and horror class called The Thing from Another World from 1951. The Thing from Another World is basically a science fiction classic, and what it is about is Dr. Carrington, played by Robert Cornthwaite, reports a UFO near his North Pole research base. The Air Force sends a team in under Captain Patrick Hendry to investigate what they find. And what they end up finding is a wrecked spaceship and a humanoid creature frozen in the ice. They bring their discovery back to the base, but Carrington and Hendry disagree over what to do with it. Meanwhile, the creature is accidentally thawed and begins to wreak havoc on those around it. So I think this is an interesting movie. It wasn't as good as The Thing from 1982. It was nowhere near as good as that. It's not that it was black and white. It's the fact that it wasn't honestly that scary when you watched it. Like when I watched The Thing from 1982 about a week and a half ago, that genuinely scared me. This didn't do it for me. Not that it wasn't good. It was a good movie. Just nothing about it was scary per se. Now, I'm no horror movie fan, so I don't really watch these movies. I don't go out of my way to watch these movies. But from what I will say is the fact that it was believable, which I mean that is something that you always look at as a moviegoer is what I'm watching believable, and if not, why is that? It was believable. It just wasn't scary, and maybe it was because it's black and white or the different how actors and acting and shots have improved over time. Maybe that has to do with it. I don't really know. There could be anything. But I feel like at any point, movies have improved. So, not to rip on this one too much, but I didn't find it scary. But it was good. There was a couple moments where I cringed, but I wasn't scared. Now, I think the thing that this movie does well is, I don't know if it was just me that saw this, but it highlighted paranoia really well. And what I mean by that is the fact that there was a lot of times in the movie, I forget the name of the character, but instead of consulting with others, he would just start swinging a knife or whatever would happen, and he would just like go out of his way to make sure this thing was dead, which I found kind of interesting. I also, before I get into the my citing my sources, I also found the movie to be a little bit. Oh gosh, there's a word I'm looking for. Kind of like a Rear Window vibe, and kind of like a Frankenstein vibe. It didn't scare me, but for the time, it probably was very, very scary. That's the best thing that I can think of to compare it to. So, the facts I'm going to be using is Cinebeat.com. It's 10 fun facts about the movie The Thing from Another World from 1951. Number one is Christian Nyby is credited as the director, but many critics, scholars, and fans believe Howard Hawks had actually directed this film. Even some of the actors on set insisted that Hawks was a creative force behind the camera. Despite this, Hawks refused to take credit and repeatedly attributed the film to Nyby, who had previously worked under him as an editor. Throughout his life, Nyby was frustrated by these claims, but admitted that he was inspired by his mentor and Hawks' influence. Particularly during the fast-paced dialogue scenes, it is plainly apparent. So that is interesting that there is no, as fans would claim, no one set director. Like they've given each other credit, which I mean that is interesting. Which I also see why they did that, because for me maybe it goes back to like The Road a little bit. Not one set. The characters don't have names. This one doesn't have a set director. I mean that's maybe a little different, but that's the thing that I can kind of the thing that I compare it to. Secondly, this was the first of two films produced by Howard Hawks and his semi-independent RKO-backed company, Winchester Pictures. That is interesting. Semi-independent, so it probably didn't have a big budget, especially for probably the 50s. A big budget back then is probably way different than it would be, say, today. Thirdly, the script was written by Charles Lederer and based on the novella Who Goes There, written by John W. Campbell Jr. Campbell was a science fiction pioneer and editor of Astounding magazine retitled Analog in the year 1960. For nearly 4 decades during that time, he helped launch the careers of many prominent genre authors, including Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov. Campbell wrote Who Goes There in 1938 under the pseudonym Don Stewart, and although he published many more novels and short stories, Who Goes There is still the only one that has been adapted for the screen. I think that right there goes to show how much how beloved this movie is, why people like it, why it's been remade 1 to maybe 2 times, probably even a 3rd time coming up here. Number 4, acclaimed writer William Faulkner, who was a friend of Howard Hawks and worked with him on a number of films, is rumored to have contributed to the script, although he's not listed in the credits. I'd heard of William Faulkner before reading this, and I actually did not know that. Margaret Sheridan, who plays the wisecracking secretary, was discovered by Hawks in 1945 after he spotted a modeling photo of her in Vogue magazine. At the time, she was a college student enrolled at USC, or University of Southern California, but she dropped out of college to become Hawks' protege. The director paid for her acting classes, voice coaching, and other actives in the hopes that she would eventually become a Hollywood star. Sheridan made her screen debut in The Thing from Another World, obviously, and received positive reviews, but her acting career never took off. Also, instead of having her acting career take off, she stopped acting and got married and became a mother. So I feel like that is interesting. So this guy had all these hopes for her, Hawks that is, and it kind of didn't pan out because she had other ways of going about her life, which, I mean, you can't really blame her for. Number 6, actor James Arness plays the monstrous Thing, and he was allegedly so embarrassed by his role that he didn't attend the premiere screening. In his autobiography, Arness claims that the worst part about making the movie was having to spend hours in the makeup chair. The process was so time-consuming that he occasionally left work early to go get lunch or grab a newspaper while wearing his monster makeup. As a result, Arness's appearance frightened strangers until he explained that he was in the process of making a movie. So that's a little interesting that I think is the man was, I mean, I wouldn't be embarrassed by shooting a movie, but I can see why, because it's so time consuming sitting in the chair. But the one thing is the part of being embarrassed that not attending the premiere. I mean, I guess I'm not an actor, so I don't get it, but I wouldn't be embarrassed if I'm playing a monster. I mean, you sign on to do it. I mean, you kind of have to. I mean, this is a tough one because, I mean, you're signing on to play an actor or to play a monster. As an actor, you're playing the monster. Like, I don't really get it, and maybe I never will, and maybe I'm not supposed to. But he signed on to play this monster, but is embarrassed by it. That's a little weird to me. But I mean, the one thing I will say is I've heard from watching documentaries with actors is spending time in the makeup chair is never a fun time. That I have heard, and as long as it sometimes can take, I can see why that would not be fun. Factoid number 7. Despite the best efforts of the makeup department, supervised by Lee Greenway, nobody was particularly happy with the way Arness looked in close-up shots. The makeup apparently made the 6'7" actor look like a giant carrot, so there are very few shots of the monster in the movie. See, that is interesting now because we're coming to an interesting point. Maybe he was embarrassed because they told him he looked like a carrot and he kind of took it to heart, which, I mean, if that is the case, that's a little, I think, honestly, to me, that's a little rude, but is what it is. Also, watching the movie, I knew that Arness was tall, but I didn't know 6'7" tall. So that's a little fact within the fact itself. I did not know he was that tall, but I did know he was taller for the times. Like, he looked about, if I had to guess, I would have said 6'4". And I think another thing is watching this movie, you can kind of see why they chose the actor because, again, if you're thinking of a monster, for me, I think of a very tall, big, bulky human being. And I feel like with Arnis, that's what they got. Big, bulky guy, very tall. So he played the role well, in my opinion. But when you're calling the guy a giant carrot and they're not happy with the way he looked close up, I mean, his point about feeling embarrassed is valid, honestly. Number 8. The film terrified audiences when it first came out, thanks to its serious approach to the material, so much that a young boy who saw the film in Georgia was so shocked by the viewing experience that he became catatonic. According to James Arness, studio executives asked the actor to visit the boy in the hospital to comfort him and explain that the alien monster on screen wasn't real. Thankfully, the boy recovered before Arness scheduled the visit to meet the little boy. That is interesting. See, I had read this, and I feel like I said, it's not, for today's standards, this is not a scary movie, but back then I could 100% see why one would think it would be because of the fact that it made a kid catatonic because he was scared. So again, at that time, this probably was a very, very scary movie. And I think this just goes to show it. Number 9, John Carpenter included a clip of The Thing from Another World in his horror film Halloween from 1978. Carpenter would later go on to direct his own adaptation of Who Goes There, simply titled The Thing, in 1982, which was much more faithful of an adaptation to Campbell's original story. And lastly, Carpenter's film inspired a prequel in 2011, also titled The Thing, which starred Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Additionally, The Thing from Another World has been credited for influencing many other films, including Horror Express, Alien from 1979. If you're listening, Professor Humphrey, I know that's your favorite movie, so that's interesting. And more recently, The Last Winter and The Thaw, both of which came out in 2006 and 2009, respectively. So those are just some fun facts and tidbits. The next thing I wanted to talk about is about, let's go here to The Thing from Another World on Wikipedia. So interestingly enough, the runtime is 87 minutes. The budget, let's look at the budget here. The budget for the movie was, it says, budget was really not given. Oh, there it was. The budget for A Thing from Another World was $980,000, and it only grossed $1.5 million. So I think that is a little, what one would call today a flop. Now, I don't mean that in a rude way, because back then, $2 million in the 50s is probably a lot of money, as it probably should be. For most people, it is a lot of money. I mean, for me, it's a lot of money, heck. But I think another thing that is also a hard thing to understand is why this movie flopped. I couldn't really find much on it, and the reason it didn't give why it flopped, it said the main reason I could find was there weren't huge named actors at the time. Which, I mean, I understand that, but I've always felt, as a comm major and a media person, if a movie's good, I don't have to know the actors if the story's good and the actors are good at acting. You don't have to be a big name for someone to watch it. Yes, it does help, but I don't feel like it's needed per se. And then I think, interestingly, I'll break a little bit of the plot down. It says, in Anchorage, journalist Ned Scott, looking for a story, visits the Officers Club of the Alaskan Air Command, where he meets Captain Pat Hendry, his co-pilot and flight navigator. General Fogarty orders Hendry to fly to Polar Expedition 6 at the North Pole per a request from its lead scientist, Nobel laureate Dr. Arthur Carrington. Carrington has radioed that an unusual aircraft has crashed nearby, period. With Scott, Corporal Barnes, Crew Chief Bob, and a pack of sled dogs, Hendry pilots a Douglas C-47 Skytrain transport aircraft to the remote outpost. Upon arrival, Scott and the airmen meet radio operator Tex, scientist Dr. Chapman, and his wife, and colleagues Voorhees, Stern, Redding, Stone, Lawrence, Wilson, Ambrose, and Carrington. Hendry later rekindles his romance with Nikki Nicholson, Carrington's secretary. Several scientists fly with the airmen to the crash site, finding a large object buried beneath the ice. As they spread out to determine the object's shape, they realize that they are standing in a circle, outlining a flying saucer. The team attempts to free it from the ice with thermite, but a violent reaction when the craft's metal alloy completely destroys it. Their Geiger counter, however, detects something buried nearby, a frozen body perhaps. It is excavated intact in a large block of ice and flown back to the base as an Arctic storm closes in on them. Given this discovery, Hendry assumes command of the outpost, and pending radio instructions from General Fogarty, both denies Scott's permission to send out his story, and the scientist demands to examine the body. Tex sends an update to Fogarty, and the airmen settle in for the storm. A watch is posted, reliving the first shift. Barnes is disturbed by the creature's glare through the clearing ice and covers it with an electric blanket he does not realize is plugged in. The block slowly thaws, and the creature, still alive, escapes into the storm. It fights with the sled dogs and kills two, but loses most of its right forearm. Next, an airman recovers the stump after the attack, and the scientists examine its tissue, concluding that the creature is an advanced form of plant life. Carrington is convinced of its superiority to humans and becomes intent on communicating with it. The airmen begin a search which leads to the outpost's greenhouse. Carrington stays behind with other scientists, having noticed evidence of alien activity there. They then discover a hidden third sled dog, which has been bled dry, revealing the creature as a vampire that feeds on blood. Carrington and the other scientists post a secret watch on their own, hoping to encounter it before the airmen do. The next morning, the airmen continue their search. Tex informs them that Fogarty is aware of their discovery and demands further info, now prevented by this fierce storm that is all around them. Stern appears badly injured and tells the group that that the creature has killed and bled two scientists. When the airmen investigate, they are attacked but manage to barricade the creature inside the greenhouse. Hendry confronts Carrington and orders him to remain in his lab and quarters. Carrington, obsessed with this creature, shows Nicholson and the other scientists that he has been growing small alien plants from seeds taken from the severed arm and feeding them with the base's blood plasma supply. That was actually a really interesting part of the movie, because we see that in The Thing, but they never mention in the other movie, in The Thing from '82, that this is a plant life. I do find that is really, really interesting. And before we wrap up here, I'll finish this. Hendry discovers that when the plasma is needed to treat Stern, which leads him to Carrington, discovers the theft when the plasma is needed to treat Stern, which leads him to Carrington. Fogarty transmits orders to keep the creature alive, but it escapes from the greenhouse and it attacks the airmen in their quarters. They douse it with buckets of kerosene and set it aflame, forcing it to retreat into the negative 60-degree Fahrenheit storm. After regrouping, they realize the creature has sabotaged the base's furnace's oil supply, plummeting temperatures indoors. They retreat to the station's generator room to keep warm and rig a high-voltage electrical fly trap. The creature continues to stalk them. At the last moment, Carrington pleads with it, but it's knocked violently aside. The creature walks into the trap and is then electrocuted. On Hendry's order, it is reduced to a pile of ash. When the weather clears up, Hendry and Nicholson are careening toward marriage, and Scotty is finally able to radio his story of a lifetime, unquote, to a room full of reporters in Anchorage, Alaska. He ends his broadcast with the warning, tell the world, tell this to everybody. Wherever they are, watch the skies. Everywhere. Keep looking, keep watching the skies, unquote. Now, that's a quick breakdown of the movie, but I do want to point out that the ending of this movie, to me, was there's a word I'm looking for, not hard to follow, but it was actually easier to follow, but it didn't give me a sense of edge of my seat, like that sense of like what's going to happen next. I don't know why, but The Thing from '82 really did that for me. It got me on the edge of my seat when you see the two actors remaining, and this movie didn't do that. Maybe it's because of the time it was filmed in. I don't know for certain. That's probably part of it. But all in all, it was a good movie. I would recommend it. I wouldn't watch it again, but for those who haven't, I would watch this and then watch the thing from 82 if you want to watch them in order. The one from 82 is better, but if you want to watch this, I would honestly say go ahead. I feel like it is worth it. So this has been my podcast, everybody. Thank you for listening.